Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share just part of a very brief memorandum to talk hosts from John Manelli. Date, November 15th, 1994. Subject, Bob Grant Roundtable. And by the way, lest you think this was imposed on us from John, it was my idea. I went to John about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and I said I thought it would be a very good idea to do this. He agreed. At any rate, here is the just a little bit of the memo. On Thursday from 4 to 6 p.m., Bob Grant will be anchoring a special esteemed roundtable. During his program, panelists will include Lionel, Ed Koch, Rush Limbaugh, if he has free time, which is unlikely because of his late afternoon TV taping, Jay Diamond, and Curtis Sliwa. James and or Joel may join the roundtable around 5:45. Lynn's on vacation. Now, the topics will include the elections, talk radio's role in the elections, and talk radio in general. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask, there's Curtis Sliwa's here, and Lionel is here, and Jay is here. Ed Koch probably will join us a little later, but I'm going to ask the gentlemen who are here a question. And then after they all answer the question, we're just going to have open conversation, nothing structured here. I'll start with, I'm going to start with Lionel, because he's on at 6 o'clock in the morning. We'll take them as their time of day. Lionel, how do you see your role in doing your program? How do you, what is it that you want to do? I mean, what impact, if any, do you hope to have on the public, or are you just having a good time? I mean, tell us how you see yourself.
Well, I probably, to be quite honest with you, I would hope that it would be entertaining. And that doesn't necessarily mean a song and dance, a little seltzer in your pants, to use the Mary Tyler Moore, but compelling, if you will, entertaining through infotainment. I don't know who coined that phrase, but I was thinking that when I was younger, news was kind of like your father's news. You know that ad that says, "This isn't your father's Oldsmobile." News was Hutley and Brinkley and Walter Cronkite, and very staid, very... Today, news is entertaining. CNN, ESPN, ESPN2, CNN, CNN2, every conceivable version of news. My God, we're being... Mr. Koch?
Oh, nice. We're just shaking hands with Ed Koch, who just walked in.
But as far as being a social force or something, no, I don't. That's not my goal. If it happens, I would like somehow to be able to be a ringmaster for all this going on. It's great in the morning. I think Curtis can bear this out. It's fun to be able to tell people, did you happen to hear this? And then talk about it. News today is not boring. It doesn't have to be boring. Yes. So I think my main goal is to entertain, inform. But as far as being a social force, if it happens, great. But I think it's just to compel listenership. And after that, whatever happens, I think it pretty much, the momentum it creates is pretty much its own.
All right. Ed Koch just joined us. Ed, we have begun. I asked the question of Lionel first, and I'm going to ask you how you see your role in the program you do from 11 to 12. What it is that you have in mind when you go on there?
I think of my show as an educational show, and the format, I think, is different than most talk shows. I have no guests. Never. And I don't want them using up my time. So what I do is I take the first 20 minutes of my show, and I comment on the news of the day, editorials of the day, and indicate where I think they're dead wrong or where I agree with them. And then, generally speaking, the questions that come in will relate to those items. They don't have to, but they generally will. And I generally cover anywhere from 8 to 12 items that are different. Then, during the course of my show, I'm very quick, so to speak, in responding to a question. And some people think I'm rude. I don't intend to be rude. But if somebody asks a question and I give the answer and they don't add any further information, I will say, well, bye-bye, you haven't added to my store of information. And why do I do that? Because you want people to continue to listen, and they get bored. if you can be a nice guy and polite and let the question be repeated 6 times, and pretty soon you only have 6 people listening. So every now and then I have to apologize and say to people, I don't want you to think I'm rude, but I want to keep this show moving so that you will learn something, as I will learn something, rather than be very polite and allow someone to take 10 minutes to ask a question that they could have disposed of in 30 seconds.
All right. Jay, how do you see yourself? What is
It's an interesting question. I think I do a better job when I'm totally unconscious and unaware of myself. If I hassle myself or worry about what I'm going to do for 4 hours, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., and I'm conscious of Jay Diamond as a person, now I've got to put on a show. What am I going to talk about? Mayor Koch is laughing.
Well, I'm laughing because occasionally I get a letter that says Jay Diamond mimicked you, and I never listened to you. So could I hear it? And I'm not.
Please, not now. I'm talking. Bob asked me a question.
Good.
If you want a private show later, now we're doing something else. Okay?
Stop. You know what he'll do? I have to. You know what he'll do once in a while?
What?
If someone is going on all of a sudden, and he fooled me. I was listening, driving home one time, and all of a sudden, I thought you had come into the studio because he says, stop.
Right.
Go ahead, show him what you do.
But I got to tell you something about the mayor.
Yeah.
And I saw you in June of 1989 for the first time in person. You were at public school, what is it, on 28th Street and 9th Avenue.
Yeah, I know it's right, yeah.
And I came there because I was rooting for you, and I remember it was in Chelsea there near the school.
Right.
And you walked in, and I see this big fella with the body of a Greek god, and I said, you never sounded intimidating physically. When I looked at you, had that serious, dour look on your face.
He told me about that.
And so help me. And I told Bob, I said, when you see him in person, particularly the first time, it's like Duke Wayne is walking into the room.
Well,
and your voice doesn't indicate that you're going to look like that.
It's because everybody thinks I'm short. I know why. Wherever I go, people will say, gee, you're much taller than I thought you were. And I say, and better looking too, right? And the reason I seem to be shorter, I'm 6'1". The reason I seem to be shorter is that whenever you would see me, you would normally see me on television, and I'd be sitting next to A. Beam, and my length is in my legs.
Yeah.
So when A. Beam and I are sitting side by side, he's as tall as I am.
Yeah. Did you finish, Jay?
No. So what I was saying was, if I'm conscious of myself, if I'm aware of myself, trying to plan a program, then you'll hear me stammer, I'll stutter, I'll edit my words while I'm saying them.
In other words, you have to be spontaneous.
When I work best, I think it's when I come in here and I just react to things that are going on around me.
Yeah, I do that too.
Now, Curtis, we want to hear from you, and then we'll take a brief time out.
Well, I don't pretend to be a professional broadcaster, even though I spent my early years not listening to FM veg-heads cutting stacks of wax top 40, as many of my peers did, but rather listen to professionals such as yourself, Barry Gray, Barry Farber, the McCanns, Alex Bennett, even George Putnam from out in Los Angeles.
George, sure.
Men and women who paved the way, who made it possible for many of us to earn a very good living.
You
as a talk
forgot
show host.
Long John, Curtis.
And Candy Jones. I can never forget packing out shelves at an AMP at 3, 4 in the morning to the voices of Long John and Candy. And they always told how they had gone to school, university, perfected their craft, had gone out to Des Moines and Omaha, and had worked small stations, sometimes as an apprentice, learning their craft. And then suddenly, they had the big opportunity to come to a New York, Chicago, or L.A. I was blessed with a gift. All of a sudden, a broadcaster in New York. That would sort of be the equivalent of playing center field for the New York Yankees. I'd cut off both my arms to do that.
How do you see yourself, though, when you commence your broadcast? What is it you have in mind? What is it?
Well, since I can't compete with the professionals, I believe my function is to be an advocate for the little guy, little gal out there, the person who's like dangling by a string. Maybe they were on the front pages last week. Now they've been relegated to the back pages near the obituary column, and as you know, Bob, out of sight, out of mind. So I need to try to bring them back to the attention of the listeners, and if necessary, sort of promote some popular public support for a concept that is good and pure, but if not given the attention, might suddenly be lost.
All right, we're going to take a brief time out. I was a guest on CNN with Judy Woodruff the other night. We didn't get much time to talk about talk radio's role in the elections, talk radio in general. Some people say we have too much power. Some people say it's only natural that in a democracy we would have this, quote, power. I want to discuss that with all of you gentlemen right here. Ed Koch, Curtis Sliwa, Lionel, and Jay Diamond, and we'll continue on WABC. What are the... I don't want to structure this. I mean, after all, you're all...
Can I add something to that,
Yeah,
if you don't
sure.
mind? Somebody may think that there was some kind of either a tacit or an express directive, some kind of imprimatur that you must defend him. You must defend one of your own. I just want people to understand that at no time did anybody ever say, listen, we'd appreciate you saying something about Bob, or nothing.
No, they didn't.
I mean, absolutely nothing, because sometimes I think the skeptical listener may think that this is some type of a club. And I just wanted that to be made very... I mean, I can only speak for me. I received no memo or directive, and certainly in the middle of the night when we're on, there's nobody to tell us pretty much what to do.
Well,
so we're sincere.
Let's find out what... you had a good suggestion, Lyle. What comment do you like to hear the most?
Let me ask you, Ed, and Curtis, and rather than what do you see yourself as, which is kind of interesting. You can get very metaphysical about that. But what is your greatest compliment? When a listener or somebody says to you, Ed, you had me laughing, or when you talked about something, or you made me vote, or
I'm going to give you the greatest compliment.
Stop. I've always wanted to say that. I'm sorry.
It was paid to me yesterday when Governor-elect Pataki called me and asked me to serve on the transition committee, and then he says, by the way, I always listen to the voice of reason, which is the way I build myself, right? In fact, I'm the only voice of reason in America because I trademarked it in Washington. Any other voice of reason will get a lawsuit.
Oh.
Now, what is interesting is I said to him, Governor, you're putting me on. He said, no. He said, when I'm in the car, I turn to listen to the voice of reason. I think it's terrific. Now, it's amazing the power of radio. There was a time when nobody gave a damn about it, you know. But now it's just everywhere, and I think it's terrific. And let's take this station. I mean, you have views which are all over the political lot. I don't think that of the five of us sitting here that anyone could say that we have the same point of view. We're all quite different, and I'm proud of that. And what I have said to people, and I've written about it because I have a column in the New York Post every Friday. I said, if you don't agree with someone, and let's assume you think they're an anti-Semite, or they're anti-black, or they're anti-Catholic, or whatever it is, or anti-gay, or any of the antis, so to speak. You don't want to listen? Turn the dial. Better still, call them up and fight them in the forum of ideas. But you don't want to censor people. There are people who don't like what I say. And I think that what I say is honest and truthful, and I believe that most people think that. But there are some people who say, no, what you say, I don't like it. It's racist. You mention crime. That's a code word. It's not a code word to talk about crime.
What about being misquoted? Doesn't that drive you crazy when somebody will say...
Or quoted outrageously out of context.
You will say one thing, for example, I made it known, and I'm not a particular fan of Newt Gingrich. I can say 999 things that people agree with. But one lady called you before, Bob, on the way over, I was listening. She says, I mean, how dare it? And it's amazing. I'm thinking to myself, either A, this woman has no sense of normalcy or balance, or two, am I that persuasive where something that I agree makes her that upset? Or what? I mean, it's amazing. New York Talk Radio, maybe you're not familiar with it because you've been here for so long, you don't realize it. But there's no gray, there's no medium.
True.
It's either complete indifference or absolute red-hot passion.
The mayor is a politician. Maybe you can vouch for what I say, or you can refute me. How much of politics is original and how much is a reaction to another stimulus? I'll give you an example of what I mean. Lionel mentions Newt Gingrich. Some people like Newt Gingrich. Some people don't like Newt Gingrich. I like Newt Gingrich more every time I hear his enemies vilify him. I am drawn to sympathize with him more every time I see him denounced as an authoritarian in this stupid New York Times editorial.
Right. My column tomorrow deals with this. And what I say is that what the New York Times is doing and is done with its two most recent editorials on Newt Gingrich is to try to demonize him. Now, I don't happen to agree with him. He's far too the right. And I think some of the things that he has recently said, which is that after you have put people off of welfare and they still don't have jobs, and the question is asked, well, who will take care of them? And he says, charity. I don't agree with that. I do agree that there have to be enormous changes in the welfare system. But I also say that when the New York Times attacked his contract with America, I agree with everything in that contract with America.
And I tend
everything.
to empathize with him more when I see the campaign of denunciations and vilification.
And you mentioned the two words authoritarian and authoritarianism. What they're trying to convey is a fascist.
Yeah.
Or maybe two
Sotto
lungs.
voce.
Yeah, right. And then they said, and he's like George Wallace and code words of race, but they gave no illustration of any racism on his part.
And who does
It
it
was an
remind you
outrage.
of? Who was the first politician that, at least in my consciousness, I mean, there were others, but I would say that modern-day activism in New York City was born after the 1985 mayoral campaign, when you were singled out for denunciation. Prior to 89, didn't you get an overwhelming proportion of the black vote every time you ran?
I'll tell you.
Am I nuts,
certainly
or
did.
am I remembering it
certainly did.
correctly? Then you were demonized
I
after...
want to just tell you, I carried... I ran in 1977. I got 50% of the total vote in the general election, and I got most of the black vote because I was the Democratic candidate. Now, when I ran in 1981, I got 75% of the vote, and I got the black vote again. In 1985, I ran against a black candidate.
Herman Farrell.
Right,
Denny
Denny
and Carol Bellamy.
And he got 40% of the black vote, and I got 38%.
Right.
That ain't bad.
That's good.
Right? Now, when David Dinkins ran in 89, the black vote went something like 95% for David Dinkins.
But the campaign of vilification
it
toward
was.
you began after the 85
I
campaign.
remember when Ed Koch was in a black church. You were very brave, and they were jeering
They
you,
sure were.
and they were.
Right.
That was tough.
I'm
That
going
was
to
tough
give you a
take,
little
wasn't
story.
it?
And I had town hall meetings all over town. I had 135 town hall meetings, and I went to 5 that were really raucous. And I remember going to one. It was in Harlem. And I never, ever canceled a town hall meeting, even when the cops told me that it might be dangerous. But I remember the one in Harlem. It was early in my career, and there were ideologues and demagogues, and you could find them in the white areas too. I had problems there on occasion as well. But on this particular occasion, I brought up commissioners, and we each sat at separate desks to handle personal problems. This was not a talk town hall meeting. This was a town hall meeting where you could talk to a commissioner and get your personal problem solved if we could solve it. And I remember this young man sitting down in front of my desk, and he said, looking at me in the eye, he said, "You know, I could reach across this desk and snap your neck before anyone could intervene."
Nice guy.
And I want to tell you, I thought to myself, well, it's over. So then I said, well, isn't that interesting? You know, trying to lighten the load. Now, that was a frightening experience. Nothing happened, but it was just that chilling
All right,
experience.
excuse me, Jay.
All right,
Jay,
all right.
well, Joe Nolan's over there, the Metro
Oh, I
Traffic
wouldn't
Control
keep Joe
Center,
Nolan.
and we have a couple of commercials, you know.
Is there really a Joe Nolan? Does he exist?
Unfortunately, there is.
As viewed by responsible citizens. So my last engagement was in the Bronx at a senior citizen center, and I got there at 10 o'clock at night. I was a little late, having been all over town, and there were 200 elderly men and women, Jewish, in this senior citizen center. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I'm late, but I want to tell you, as you know, the number one issue in this debate in this election is crime. And there was applause. And I said, I want to tell you a little story. A judge that I know was mugged this week. And do you know what he did, ladies and gentlemen? He called a press conference. And at the press conference, he said to the reporters, this mugging of me will in no way affect my decisions in matters of this kind. And then I saw an elderly lady in the back of the room, and she gets up and she says, "Then mug him again."
Might I add, though, just not to take away from your election and your hard-fought battles, because you were up against the titans of our time. Percy Sutton, who had been borough president of Manhattan, Badillo, Biaggi, Blumenthal, Bella Abzug. I mean, these were all great politicians in their own right. But I truly believe that the hero of the blue-collar working-class people who would have really gone on to great political achievement had he not suffered personal problems was our champion in my neighborhood, Mario Biaggi. Remember, the most highly decorated...
You say personal problems. He had a problem that was very serious.
True. No.
What he lied about the Fifth Amendment. That was in 73,
Right,
though.
but-
He knocked himself out of the
But
box.
to be honest...
That's why Abe Beam was elected.
To be
Ed
honest,
Koch didn't run until 77.
understood. But let's be honest.
Yeah.
Mario Biaggi served his constituents. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
loved by his
He
kids,
was a
and he was
great constituent servant.
considered a cop's cop,
Oh,
the most
without a
highly
doubt.
decorated
Oh, yeah,
New York
yeah.
City. I'm just saying, had these other things not affected that.
Well, these other things are important.
Understood. Understood.
Isn't it
I
funny
just wanted to add that,
Listen,
'cause that
Curtis,
oftentimes
Curtis,
gets lost in the
I
discussion.
was a very young guy, maybe 18 years old. I was in front of King's Plaza, and he was there campaigning when this controversy over the Fifth. I think his daughter had involvement in that Fifth Amendment
right.
case too, right?
Yeah.
Mario's daughter. Well, anyway, I walked over to him right in front of King's Plaza, which had just opened up in 1973 during the election
That's right.
campaign, and I said, "Mario, hang in there." He looked down at me. He said, "You bet I will," and he hit me on the shoulder. 12 hours later, he dropped out. True
Well,
story.
he had
You
to.
bet I will.
He had to.
Well, no, he was.
I mean, that's. Let's go on here. Let's try to focus on what it is that we do. People are saying, I'm reading publications all over, and of course, in view of what's happened to me in the past month since that Hatchet job at New York Magazine came out, I'm more acutely aware of the attention being paid to us. Whether you're Ed Koch, former mayor, whether you're Lionel, whether you're Jay, me, Curtis, there's a lot of attention being paid to us. I began talk radio with KABC in Los Angeles in 1963. Then General Manager Ben Hoberman got a hold of me. He says, "You are natural for this. This medium was made for you, this format. I want you to do this." I've been doing it ever since. But back then, we had one old lady in tennis shoes after another from Pasadena calling. We didn't have this
I'd like to hear those
wide,
tapes of you.
eclectic group of people. And here it is, all these years later, we're being heralded now as the hottest element in the broad spectrum of media in America today. That's what they're saying. Radio, what do you think?
Well, we have to, come to grips, unless you already discussed it before I got here, because I was about 7 minutes late, for which I'm sorry. We have to come to grips with the attacks on you and your defenses to them, because otherwise people will say this is a program that's just intended to be fluff, and that doesn't serve your purposes or mine. So, and I'm going to be, as straightforward with you as I am when I'm not with you.
That's why I'm glad you're here. You know
okay.
why? Because people love to try to create trouble, and they love to quote you. And I talked to Manelli, and he says, "No, he didn't say that.
This is
Here's
what I
he
say.
really said."
I'm going to tell you what I say. I heard one of your, we do commercials, and they
The gargle with razor blades.
Yeah, and so I said when I heard that, I said it on my program. I said it's vulgar. Maybe you don't think it is. I thought it was vulgar.
No, you're right. It is. I learned that from my mentor, Joe Pines.
Oh, all right.
But I don't think it's
okay?
vulgar in the context
No?
of your on-air persona crafted over 30 years.
All right.
There's a difference between if I do it and he does it.
But
he
the
was
audience-
But I don't
responding to
listen.
the
You
commercial.
understand?
Okay.
I don't listen to any
See,
of
Jack
you.
Benny only had to
doing
look at the audience. When he says that, there are people know to take it with a grain
I
of
want to
salt.
explain something to you. I don't listen to the radio other than when I'm on. I mean, you have to understand, I'm a practicing lawyer, and I do a whole host of other things, so I don't listen to the other radio hosts. I heard this because it was done on my program as a commercial, and I said it was vulgar. Okay. Then the other one that I was aware of was the comparison of David Dinkins with a washroom attendant. And I said, that is not nice. That is racist. I said, I don't think you do that anymore. I mean, and then I also said, everybody would withdraw comments that we make from time to time. I mean, you, in the heat of passion or jest, you will say something that you regret and you'd like to call back. I don't think that Jesse Jackson is anti-Semitic because I don't happen to think so, because he said
Hymietown.
Hymietown. I don't think so. Now I want to tell you that could be part of his upbringing. There are people who will, instead of because we'll never use the N-word, because once you say it, they'll take it out of context and they'll say, you used it, so you can never use the N-word. But there are people who will refer to N-town, right? In various parts of this country. And if you said to them, what'd you say? They'd say, well, it's like talking about Jewtown, Pollocktown, blah, 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 whatever it happens to be. Chinatown. But it ain't, using the vernacular. And so that's why I think you have to address that because that's the one I'm aware of, in order to put it on the table. I suspect that you're not going to use that again. I mean, and that maybe you're sorry you used it. I don't know. What do you think?
You're right. Looking back now, and people who say, it's only because he's been through what he's been through. Regardless of what it took, I look back, I assess it, and I say, it doesn't make any difference what I was feeling inside, because the public can't see our insides. They can only go by what's outside. I used to call your immediate predecessor the almost mayor. I called his predecessor the Tower of Jelly. I called the emperor because one day you said, I'm going to have 5 terms.
I'm going to be mayor for life, I said.
You remember that?
Mayor for life.
You said, I'm going to have 5 terms.
Right.
After my 5 terms. I said, he sounds like an emperor.
Right.
And I called you the emperor.
Right.
You didn't take offense I called you the emperor.
I certainly did not.
No, okay.
But that's different than David Dinkins.
I know.
Is it possible to look back after this is, I hope it's over. In fact, last night I was wondering when I heard Mr. Chang from Channel 4 talk to you again.
Yeah,
Asking you, it's like, if I want to hear the word, I don't want to hear the word savage. I pledge I will never say it again in any context, no matter what. I'm just so bored of the subject.
Well, last night people called me up. Why won't you let me say savage?
In the New York
They yell at me all night. Why can't I
Times,
say
they have a
savage?
story about someone suffering a savage beating today.
Right.
Savage.
But here is the issue. Here is the big issue. Is there a duty, to use, I guess, negligence theory? Do you owe a duty? Is there a standard of care that you, as a broadcaster, by virtue of your position here, do you owe something to somebody? Collectively, the population, or to normalcy, or to manners, or what's appropriate? What is the duty that you owe? Not to offend. What is this thing that you are constantly found at fault for? What is this thing that we do?
Now, you're very consistent, and I admired what you were doing today about that incident at Montclair State. I think we ought to pursue this. Because it ties in with what we all do. We'll do it in just a moment. Ed Koch and Jay Diamond. What about people like us who are speaking without notes, without script? It's a very visceral thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I react to people maybe too much. Do we have to start second-guessing ourselves lest we say something that's not politically correct?
That's the issue, and I guess the question is, tomorrow you do your show, Ed and Curtis and Jay, and what duty do you owe? For example, what are the rules? If you have a feeling in your mind that is offensive to me, and I say I think that was misogynistic, or it was sexist, or it was anti-homophobic, or whatever, what does that mean? Do I owe you an apology? Do I necessarily change the way I think because you're going to be offended? Is this going to be vanilla radio? Because everybody has talked about this precious broadcast seat that you enjoy, Bob, and your duty to humanity, and how dare you breach the standard of care that has been given to you from on high. And I really wonder...
Let me try to give an answer to that. And you, Bob, pointed it out in the New York Magazine article when you said, well, when Koch... this may be a paraphrase. When Koch denounces Farrakhan, he will also mention David Duke or Rabbi
Mayor
Kahane.
And that's because he wants to have an equivalence so as to effectively avoid the charge of being a racist, something like that.
And
you're actually
you know
right.
what? You know what?
You're
You're
absolutely
right. You're right. I'm going to steal a page out of your book from now on.
And I do it exactly for that reason. And no question about it. I thought very perceptive of Grant. Because we have listeners. And if you talk about a black racist, blacks say, why is he only talking about a black racist? Yes, we don't like Farrakhan, but why does he only talk about Farrakhan? They can't say that with me because I did denounce not only David Duke, which everybody denounced, but also Kahane, who I thought was a racist. I said he didn't like blacks, he didn't like Arabs, and what he did was wrong, and I denounced him at the time. I called him the scum of the earth. Now, would I normally, if I was talking to a very sophisticated audience that wanted to hear about particular aspects of racism, feel compelled to do the equation? The answer is no. But do I believe that it serves a purpose, not just to protect me, but to convey to people, we're not singling out, in that case, Farrakhan, we're singling out racism and denouncing the racist, and there is such a thing as black racism, and of course there is white racism.
Do you
That's
ever not say something because you feel it's inappropriate? And if you do, what are the rules that you abide by? What are the rules here, I guess is my question.
Well, let me
aside from
mention, we have a perfect example because we did see how David Duke rose to national prominence again, almost like Lazarus from the dead. Whoever thought he'd run for major political office after having been seen in a picture with a hangman's noose, a burning cross, and wearing a designer sheet? I mean, you would have thought that's death. That's political death. Yet he rose to prominence once again, almost became governor in Louisiana. Universally, Republicans and conservatives condemned him. But yet in our own state of New York, Al Sharpton, who has made a career of this, was welcomed at the New York State Democratic Convention, was able to give a speech. Mario Cuomo went literally at a Black Bethany Baptist church, stood on him at the podium, and somehow never found it within his soul to condemn Al Sharpton and say, look, he has a right to run. He garnered the signatures, he fulfilled the rules, but this is not what the Democratic Party of New York State should represent. There are two standards. We do not attack black racists the way we do white racists and others, and I think that's why at times I will not use the laundry list of the other races, because I want to be specific. The Al Sharptons, the Masons, the Maddoxes, and all those, the Sonny Carsons of the world, who I don't want to compare to the David Dukes. I want to be specific to what they've done locally and how they have destroyed our quality of life and divided us and have created a terrible, terrible
who are
feeling.
Who are the enforcers, Curtis, of this? I don't want to say who are you afraid of, but what is the group that you are not trying
I'm not
to
afraid.
offend?
I'm not afraid.
No, but I'm saying, but in order for you to do this, what is it? Who is this? These arbiters of propriety? Who are we gearing our language towards? Is it everybody? Is it the audience? Is it?
I hate to do this, but he'll have to give you the answer, as they say in radio, in just a moment. Former Mayor Ed Koch, who joined us, he did have to leave, but I don't think there will be a paucity of verbiage, because we have with us Lionel, Jay Diamond, and Curtis Sliwa. Lionel, since we have only like about 10... I won't even ask you this. I was going to ask you how you decided to use the name Lionel. Can you answer that in 5 seconds?
It was from a movie.
From a movie. Okay.
Thank you. I'll go into that later.
Okay. All right.
After this commercial message. I can tease as well as you can, but...
Arbitron's #1 AM radio station in New York, Long Island, and the USA.
WABC, New York.
It's 5 o'clock.
From ABC News, I'm Doug Limerick. A lot of surprised reporters in Washington covering a court hearing today for the man accused of opening fire on the White House and trying to kill the president. ABC's John Bascom tells us that Francisco Duran entered a plea today.
It was to have been a routine hearing on whether some evidence should be released to news organizations. But as it began, the judge began reading the 11-count indictment against Francisco Duran. At that point, a defense attorney stood and said, off mic and not audible to the spectators, that Mr. Duran waives further reading of the indictment and pleads not guilty. The government then asked if this would be an insanity defense. Duran's lawyers may answer that question on Monday. John Bascom, ABC News at U.S. District Court in Washington.
If convicted, Duran could get life in prison. Remember last fall when a British tourist was shot dead and his woman friend wounded during a botched robbery at a Florida rest stop? Well, a jury is now deliberating the fate of one of the teenagers involved. He is 17.
All right, we're back with Lionel. We're back with Jay Diamond. We're back with Curtis Sliwa. Ed Koch was with us the previous hour. He had to leave. At 6 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, Christine Todd Whitman, governor of the state of New Jersey, will be joining me for what some people are calling an historic rapprochement. Well, we shall see. Okay, you were going to tell us something prior to our little break, or did you finish it, Lionel?
I think I finished it, whatever it was. I have no idea what I was saying.
Bob, can I mention one thing?
Sure.
What motivates us in terms of what we'd like to elicit from the listener? I think for me, my fondest moment in broadcasting is when I can get people to feel guilty. Maybe because the way we were brought up, being brought up from blue-collar, working-class parents, guilt always motivated you. It motivated you to work harder, get a second job, try to make a better life for your children and children's children, so that when we can tap that nerve in the listener who's so harried, they're working a 9 to 5, they're having to pay the mortgage, put the kids through school, put the bread and butter on the table, and yet we can make them feel guilty that they're not voting, they're not taking the issue seriously, they're not spending the time necessary to literally participate in this great form of democracy that so many others literally died for.
But do people pay too much attention to us? I know that may sound like a silly question to ask Lionel and Jay and you and of myself, but do they take us too seriously?
I hope so.
You hope
I hope so, but God forbid if they didn't. You know what's amazing if you think about this whole thing? I mean, imagine you're looking back and you're trying to explain the whole Bob Grant controversy. I still am scratching my head wondering, and you said it poignantly, you said, what are they afraid of? What did I do? If I say the worst, the most incredibly mean-spirited, racist thing, if it's indeed true, is the world going to stop spinning to be fly into the sun? Why is it that radio, I understand there are some FCC regulations, we can't say certain things, but why is it that we have to pretend we're in this pristine, nicey, Mr. Rogers world when you can go down on the street and hear literally the most incredible spate of invectives and epithets? You can't go up to an individual person and say, excuse me, but I'm going to boycott you now because you said the F word or you said something. So why is it that we have to live in this sanctified, rarefied, this hypersensitive, whiny 90s era?
Yeah, but would you prefer to have a virtual toilet spewing forth the kind of profanities we hear in the street? I mean,
I'm not talking about.
We must hold to a higher standard.
There are people.
No, he's not talking Howard Stern type thing. He's talking political commentary, right?
Right. No, I'm saying
Social
that you
commentary.
may say something that just enrages me.
Yeah.
And I wish we'd get to the crux of the issue.
No,
here.
but it's clear. There were people who had a political advantage
That's my
in
point.
coming down on Bob. That's why it happened. If somebody can advance themselves politically, then they will come down. They have people.
I'm going to tell you something that I learned about an hour or so prior to the broadcast, thanks to some friends of mine at Advertising Age. There is a woman whose name shall be withheld, who was fired by Kurt Anderson because she swears that he said, look, you're not mean enough. I don't want you working for me. He says, to work for me, you got to have a mean streak. Now, this is the guy that did the hatchet job on me in New York Magazine.
Yeah.
I just found that out prior to the broadcast. What do you make of that?
I think that pretty much goes to the motivation. You know, I said this before, and I'll say it again. Let's take that article for just a moment. If the charge were, you're a racist or a bigot, whatever the particular phrase is that you like, and that were the evidence, there would be a directed verdict. It wouldn't go to the jury. There was nothing there. That article said merely that the perception of the writer was such that he had already made up his mind, and he was either trying to induce or deduce. I don't know exactly what the logical scheme was.
Absent a specific political context,
Right.
that article would have been forgotten.
Exactly.
What happened? Wasn't it a year ago they had the front page of the New York Post with your picture and the same thing? I think the
That was
headline
October
said,
of '92.
"Hate radio."
Yeah.
Didn't it? What? No, everybody forgot about it. Went
Yeah.
nowhere. But
Yeah.
there were people. Frank Lautenberg had a political motivation to emphasize that New York Magazine
Well, let's-
article.
let's-
And by the way, I think it was coordinated by an individual whom we are familiar with. That got behind this and pushed it, gave it to Lautenberg, sent the tapes around,
Right.
and edited those tapes.
Right.
And I'm on those tapes, edited as well.
Well, that's the thing that only you and I seem to know, that this white guy out in Westfield, New Jersey, has been on my case and your case, taping, editing, and he gave Reginald Jackson these tapes. Reginald Jackson said, well, I never heard of Mr. Grant. He forgot that he was on my program twice.
Yeah, but your point, Jay's point's important. Look at the climate.
Right.
Look at when these issues come to the forefront. It's not that they have any weight all their own. It's the particular climate. Let me tell you something. There is something right now called an extortionist. Individuals who, for whatever reason, have figured out a way to literally frighten commerce, to frighten advertisers, who say, I represent a contingent of people. If you get on my bad side, if you don't do what I say, if you don't cave into my extortion, I'm going to make it tough on you. And don't forget me, don't think I'm going to go away.
But let me tell you one thing, Lionel. Although in this instance, the liberal left piled on Bob in every conceivable manner that they could, don't we have the Republican right to blame for this whole series of boycotts when they went after Ed Asner? They literally said, we'll take the bread and butter off the table because of your political views, because you're pro-Sandinista, because you show up with Chris Christopherson and William Kunstler and everyone else, because you visited Fidel and embraced him behind the sugarcane curtain. We will drive you from TV. Remember how they went after his sponsors, his advertisers, the people who literally pay the freight? Phil Donahue has spoken about this a great deal. How individuals out there, because of a strong political ideology that disagrees with yours, regardless if it's liberal or
Yeah,
conservative,
but Phil
will
didn't
target
defend
you.
me. He can tell you that Phil attacked me when you were on the CNBC. No, Phil is a hypocrite. Hey, Phil, if you're listening, you're a fake, phony, fraud hypocrite. I saw you on the air with Charlie Rose the other night. You made me ill. You made me sick to my stomach. This portion brought to you by Staten Island
Don't be
University
hateful.
Hospital. This summer, Congressman from the 9th Congressional District in the state of New Jersey by the name of Robert Torricelli had said that Rush Limbaugh and Bob Grant were enemies. These are his words, not mine. Were enemies of democracy. Can you believe that he was we were enemies of democracy?
Enemies of Cuban democracy.
And that he thought it was high time we had been curtailed, and he wanted a return to the fairness doctrine. I don't know if you had experience working when we had a fairness doctrine, but that, you used a phrase about vanilla radio.
Mm-hmm.
You want to bring back vanilla radio? You want to really kill the essence of talk radio, not just WABC, but all over? Bring back the fairness doctrine.
But I listened to you when there was the fairness doctrine. I think it was, when did it start?
Didn't the
Well,
Kennedy administration
No, but-
have a lot to, at some
It
particular
didn't
point?
seem to stultify you. You were pretty feisty right from the beginning.
Well, yes, I was, but advocacy, you couldn't do the advocacy that you can now.
You couldn't endorse a candidate.
Well, no, Barry Gray used to surprise me because he'd say, today I voted for Adam Walensky for Attorney General. I voted for Nelson Rockefeller for, you do the imitation better than I.
Lion!
Yeah. But I was surprised because when I was on the air in Los Angeles, we didn't endorse candidates. People would call and say, I figured it out. You're really for Tom Kiko. I figured it out. The next person would say, no, you're not. You're for this. But now it's all right out there in the open. And I think it's more honest now.
Now, as an example, let me ask you, Bob. Let's say in 3 or 4 hours of programming, a group of people or an individual, a high-profile individual, felt very offended by what either you said, I said, Lionel said, Jay Diamond said. Might it not be good that there be a small segment of the program somewhere there where there's a face-off? You give that person or that group an opportunity to go at you, maybe for a good 10 or 15 minutes, not dominate the whole discussion, and get off their chest in whatever manner, shape, or form they felt.
Everybody?
No, not everybody. I mean, you know, you
mean
have
voluntarily?
it each day like a lottery, one time on the show where that one group or that one event, like for instance, a Jesse Jackson or an Al, or someone who felt, I think it would make for great radio.
The people you mentioned don't want to talk.
No, but
they don't want dialogue. They want to destroy. They want to silence.
Understood.
They don't want dialogue.
But if
you picked the wrong people.
No, but if you made the opportunity available,
the opportunity is available. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call the number.
Anytime the government says anything, Curtis. Anytime the government, except for basic rules about transmitter frequencies and using the right call, aside from that, anytime the government gets the chance to affect content, other than the rules of cursing and toilet radio, whatever you refer to, that's the most dangerous thing you can even imagine.
All right, but let me give you an example. Since I represent a high-profile group that at times has been under attack. Let's say I'm in Denver, Colorado, and a top radio broadcaster there who has influence on the way the public might accept a new idea, every day is bashing me, vilifying me, and won't give me an opportunity to come on his program, because nowadays many talk show hosts don't have guests. Bob, you have guests. Jay has guests. Lionel has guests. I have guests. But there are some talk show hosts, forget it. It'll be a dark day in hell. Ed Koch said, I don't have guests. What are you to do if, let's say, an Ed Koch every day is hitting you and knocking you on your keister, and now you don't have an opportunity to get your message out to the public?
A good question.
Shouldn't there be a small window of opportunity for me, the little guy, to say, hey, wait a second. Give me at least 5 minutes of an opportunity to explain to the public where you're wrong.
What do you think? What do you think, Bob?
Well, I think that most stations are cooperative that way. I know our program director, if he gets a letter from somebody who feels they have a beef and they want to be heard, John gives them an entree. So I think it's just up to the person asking. But you don't understand the ramifications of the fairness doctrine. Is that you have to give equal time in kind.
That's understood. Broadcasting, I'd love to hear Jerry Falwell face off with the Dykes on Bikes. I'd love to hear it.
If it was governmentally mandated, it would be a disaster.
Curtis, I think that you will concede that there are ways you can get in front of a camera. You're pretty good at that.
Yeah, but not everyone has that talent.
No, all right. But and the other thing is newspapers have traditionally carried. I mean, Hearst had his newspapers and went after people rigorously.
Would you fellows object if we were joined by the pick and pack of WABC radio, the Laurel and Hardy, the Abbott and Costello? We got two guys that are on the weekends. They're
the Sacco and Vanzetti.
Yeah,
the
Sacco and
Vanzetti.
That's right. I mean, really, it's incredible. I'm almost ashamed.
Doesn't Joel Santisteban sound like a decongestant? Doesn't that sound like something you take?
Take Joel
Santisteban.
Anyway, James
9
and
out of
Joel
10 doctors
are going to join us. And if you haven't heard them, well, you don't know what you're missing. But we'll introduce them in just a moment. But right now,
Joel rarely agrees with me on anything, because to do that he would have to think a little bit, and it would be very difficult.
Whoa. You see, already.
And so that's the way it usually works. No, we agree on some things, not many. He's more liberal than I am.
Things.
And you take phone,
a lot of phone calls, and I run my mouth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he did.
No. See, I have to fight for my mic time.
You know what I said about Joel was, I said, you want to listen to James and Joel? Well, Joel is always getting interrupted by himself.
And that is an accurate description.
No, but Bob,
hey, I represent the working
features
guys.
Adorn the James and Joel show. Why, they have in the news. Who are those famous correspondents there?
Oh, yeah.
Koch
and
Buster T. Hyman.
Buster T. Hyman, yeah. Cutie Corrick.
But although you kid around and have a lot of fun, you address serious
pretty straight
subjects.
Yes,
oh, yeah.
Indeed.
James, I've known you ever since I started here at WABC over 10 years ago. This station has grown phenomenally in that time. And the whole format of talk radio has grown phenomenally. Does it surprise you?
Not at all. And one of the reasons I think that, in fact, Bob, this afternoon I was just looking at a wire copy, indicating that many of the large newspapers, including New York Times, Wall Street Journal, I believe the Chicago Tribune, all have lost circulation. What you see going on is the growth of talk radio. At the same time, many of the newspapers that we would consider to be the Washington Post is in that too. Some of the more liberal newspapers, excluding the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, are taking a hit and declining. And I think the two things are very interrelated. The growth, of course, look at what happens with the election. You find talk radio is now becoming a alternative source of information. A lot of the information you do not get on the television or in the newspapers, you will find on talk radio, or maybe in an extended news show like where you have McNeil Lair. For instance, Newt Gingrich the other night. This was his first major speech after the election. I watched CBS. What you saw was a little 2-minute clip, and basically it was a slam. Newt Gingrich, yada yada yada, nothing, and the kids are going to all be in orphanages if this passes. Where you had to go for the information was on talk radio. That people are actually telling you what he said in the speech, what the significance of it is. In our case, we played the entire speech. Well, we edited maybe about 10 minutes out of it, but for the most part, we took the time to play the entire speech so people could hear it. That is some of the reasoning that talk radio is continuing to mushroom. It's becoming the alternative for hard information, and it does not have. It does have a bias. Yes, indeed, it is conservative. But where else are you going to find that? Where are you going to find the conservative viewpoint but on radio? Will you find it in the dominant media press, print journal? No, you will not find it there. Will you find it on any of the 4 networks? Absolutely not. So where is it? It's on radio, and that's why it's growing. America is a conservative country, at least our lifestyles are, and that goes beyond race, that goes beyond gender. It is. Most of us live our lives as conservatives. We care about our families, we believe in the work ethic, most of us. And where do you find those values reflected? You're finding them reflected more on radio than you are in the dominant media.
So as an African American, James, you don't feel out of step being a conservative?
Not at all.
No.
And I think
why should he?
I think.
I mean, let's get to the point. Let's look at the elections. We haven't even talked about the elections here, Bob. Let's just say let's look at what these people are saying. I made the analogy to you off the air.
Well, only 12 to 13% of the total black vote went Republican. Now, sure, Congressman Watt won out in Oklahoma, but
Pete Wilson, 21%.
21% it went up to 21.
Right.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But 24 other candidates were defeated. J.C. Watt won because he...
Gary Franks won re-election in a mostly white district up in Connecticut, too. But what I mean by that is, look, African Americans, black, whatever you want to call it this week, is... sorry, but it's true. We are conservative people. This is... for the most part, and I know I'm painting with a very broad brush, and that can be extremely dangerous, but if you look at the way people live their lives, I'm not talking about how they vote in the booth necessarily. There is this affinity to the Democrat Party, and gladly that is starting to chip away. I think you find more and more discontent with the Democrat Party, especially as you see this heightened dependency on government that has been the hallmark of the Great Society. As more and more people become aware of the destructive nature of that, they are questioning. They are questioning the so-called leaders that gave them this, and they are questioning Democrats in general. A lot of people stayed home. That's why this scorched earth election happened for the Democrats. Not one Republican incumbent in the House or the Senate lost their seats.
All right,
Who were the losers?
I really hate to interrupt this. This is great, but you know what we're here for. And... Again, I want to thank all of you for, you know what.
But also, thank you.
Thank you for not caving in. Thank you for not saying, the hell with it. Thank you for showing up every day and putting up with this garbage. Thank you for not blowing your brains out, which a lot of people would say, the heck with it. I mean, seriously, we've got to remember, I know you're a tough guy and everybody, but this is my question. There are nights, and I think all of us know this, when you go home after 4 hours on a normal night shift.
Yep. Okay.
God bless you, Bob.
Arbitron,
the governor coming up.
AM radio station in New York, Long Island, and the USA.
WABC, New York.
It's 6 o'clock. All right, ladies and gentlemen, round 4 of the Bob Grant program, and I must tell you, I am so pleased with myself that I didn't listen to all of those well-intentioned people who, over the past several weeks, wanted me to attack the governor of the state of New Jersey. I could not find it in my heart to attack her because there was too much of a reservoir of respect and admiration for her. But as you well know, Governor, first of all, let me thank you for coming in. I appreciate it very much. But I was hurt by what had happened, and I think the best thing to do would be to confront that right now and not pretend like what happened in the past month didn't happen.
No, Bob, and I appreciate the opportunity. As you know, I said at that time that I would welcome the opportunity to come on to talk about the issue. It was never about you and me, and I tried to make that clear from the very beginning. It was about my concern of the kind of dialogue that had been happening. It's happening more and more. It's not just happening here. It's happening on a lot of shows, but particularly because you have been a supporter of mine. You and I agree on a lot of issues, on the tax issues, on government issues, on a lot of criminal justice issues, that it became even more important that I show that I am consistent. I have spoken out, whether it was Khalid Abdul Mohammed, who said things that I felt were divisive. I need to speak out on that because language affects behavior. And I know that you have a great deal of influence. You have a very loyal listenership, many of whom believe in what's said on the air, and they take it to heart. And the problem that I have that we are starting to get into more and more, and again, it's happening on a lot of different airwaves, that's troubling to me, is that we allow that talk, some of it very divisive, by categorizing groups of people because of who they are, a race, religion, age, and then thinking that when the radio's turned off, somehow all that's forgotten. And my concern is that it's not, that people take that home with them, and it makes it very difficult for them to work and live in a multicultural, multiracial society that we have today. And as I said from the onset, it wasn't about you and me, and I didn't accuse you of being a racist or anyone on this show, but I was and remained very, very concerned about some of the conversations and the dialogue that had been happening.
Well, the quotation, which I really don't have before me, that was attributed to you at the very outset. And I thought, well, maybe she was blindsided. Maybe somebody confronted her. She had other issues on her mind, and lo and behold, whammo, she's hit with this question. But it was something to the effect that although you had appeared on the air with me many times, although we campaigned together, and although you knew me, and although you had never heard me talk in such a manner, if it were true, then you had made a decision you were not going to appear on the program again. I really didn't believe at that time, and I don't believe now, sitting here looking at you, that you really enunciated those words.
Well, Bob, I can't back off those. I did. It wasn't blindsided. In fact, there'd been some talk about, again, you didn't and have never given a racist speech or anything like that. It's been a question of dialogue that's kind of developed over time. I personally have never heard it, been party to it, and I've said that, and I've been appreciative of the help you've given me. But I had looked at and been told that things were changing, that there was a level of dialogue that was very troublesome to many. So I had looked at some magazine articles, some newspaper articles, and I was very disturbed by what I read, both in quotes from you and from callers. It's not just the language, it's other people I recognize who call, but that's part of the problem too, is allowing that kind of dialogue to go unchallenged at all. And as I say, I've been, and you should be, I guess, very pleased in the sense you've certainly engendered the largest number of telephone calls and letters we've ever had at the State House on any one issue. And many of the people said that by challenging what was being said here, they took it personally that I was challenging them. And they felt that they were being called racist. I guess my concern, Bob, comes that when people listen to and kind of agree with a statement or discussions that do categorize whole groups of people, and do it in a denigrating way, and they're not troubled by it, that they should be, that's where we've got to start heightening our awareness, that this is all interrelated, that words do in fact affect behavior. There's certain words that have underlying meaning and that are buzzwords for certain people, and it makes people, if they hear this and they don't hear any contrary discussion, it makes them feel comfortable in their prejudices. And I'm working very hard, as you know, in New Jersey, to reflect on the fact that we are many faces, one family, that this is a state with over 150 different languages spoken, and we can't afford to categorize any group of people just because they belong to that group of people.
As the chief executive of the state of New Jersey, you certainly not only have a right, but a duty to speak that way. I recognize that. We're speaking from different vantage points. You as a leader, myself as a communicator.
But you're a leader, too.
Well,
and that's one of the things that I think that's one of the things that affects me so much. You are a leader. You really do affect people very deeply and very directly. And because of that, and, free speech, I will defend anyone's right to free speech. I just retain my right to speak out when I think there's a problem brewing. And it's because of your influence, because of your audience, because of your ability to affect people's opinions and the way they interact with one another, that it becomes even more important that, at least from my perspective, that I raise the questions that I've had.
One thing is certain, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who had written to the governor, you also wrote carbon copies, Xerox copies to me, and it was incredible. As a matter of fact, back in that office, I can't even get to my desk. The mail, we haven't gotten around to all of it. But in trying to read a lot of the mail, people felt that you had committed an act of perfidy.
Right.
And these are people who were genuinely hurt because they obviously voted for you in 1993, were following the success you've had since being governor, the acclaim you've received nationwide, and I shared that pride, hearing about you going out to Pete Wilson and helping his campaign, the way you were greeted in Texas and all that. Proud of you, because you're our governor. Now, these people feel let down. What can you tell them so that they won't feel let down?
Well, the thing that I can tell them, and it's what I said, and I do appreciate your having taken the time the other day to read the letter that I have sent to people, is that I'm trying to be consistent. I have always acknowledged the importance of your support and the support of your listeners during the campaign, and the fact that we do agree on a number of issues. But I can't have two sets of standards, and when something troubles me like this, when I believe that the kind of language and discussion that's going on is very divisive and will carry out beyond just the hours that you're on the radio, beyond just this radio station, out into society and into the community, when we're dealing with an increased number of bias crimes, when we're dealing with an increased number and incidents of intolerance, I've got to speak out no matter who says that. I've got to be consistent about it. I have got to tell the people, look, I have from day one, the very first event that I had before the inaugural was an event down in Atlantic City that highlighted New Jersey, many faces, one family. That has been a consistent theme of mine, and for people, I know people felt very personally betrayed. It was an interesting phenomenon in all those letters, and my feeling in response to them is I'm not betraying you. I'm trying to be a leader, and I'm doing what I feel, fulfilling my responsibility as the leader of the state in speaking out, and to assure people that I will, whenever this kind of thing occurs, whether it's someone who has been a supporter and has been someone who has been very helpful to me, or whether it's someone I don't know at all who comes in the state to go to one place and give a speech that's terribly divisive. I've got to be consistent on this, and we're undertaking a whole program that we're going to announce next month that goes to that whole theme of New Jersey, many faces, one family, and it's going to include the business community, it's going to include the nonprofit community, and it's going to go to heightening the awareness of people of the importance of how they relate to one another, of talking to one another, and how hurtful words can be.
All right, we're going to take a brief time out, then we're going to continue, and I want you to know that I have before me, ladies and gentlemen, a copy of today's Daily News, the David Hinckley column. They have a headline here, designed, I suppose, to attract the reader. Governor Whitman elects to bury hatchet and visit Grant. That might be an oversight. I don't think it was a hatchet.
I don't think it was a hatchet.
New Jersey Governor Christy Whitman returns to Bob Grant on WABC 770 AM radio at 6 p.m. Whitman, of course, announced before the election that she was through with him after controversy erupted over his alleged racism. Now, I think those words are a little exaggerated, but I don't want to dwell too much on this, and I want the governor to feel that she can talk about anything she wishes, which indeed is our desire, and who knows, we all may learn a great deal between now and 7 o'clock. I already have a great delight for me to be able to tell you that. I have been a supporter and a friend of the Speaker of the Assembly, Chuck Atayan. We had many conversations, and I must tell you, and I don't say this with any hostility. I don't say this in a pejorative sense at all. I say it out of sadness. I really believe had Chuck Atayan not distanced himself from me and almost seemed apologetic for having been on the program prior to the eruption of this scurrilous, slanderous article, that he would be the senator-elect. We talked privately, and I told him, I said, listen, if you think it'll help your candidacy, denounce me. Whatever you want to do, it's okay with me. As a matter of fact, I even went on the air and denounced myself in his behalf. But he did not appear with me, and I think that may have cost him the election. It's interesting to note that other candidates who did, they all won. Jim Treffinger won. Bill Martini won. George Pataki won. Carl McCall, the only Democrat I supported, he won in New York. Bacco. I'm not saying I'm the kingmaker, but isn't it interesting that candidates who didn't run away from me won and a candidate who did lost?
I think one of the things that maybe that talks to is the recognition of the influence that you have and shows like this can have and why it becomes so important. It's an interesting discussion to have because freedom of the speech is constitutionally guaranteed in what makes this country great, and nobody and no one should ever try to impinge on that. But what we're getting into now is a question of, is there a responsibility that goes along with that when you're in a position to have as much influence as you do? And I know Chuck was very much during the campaign said that he would not distance himself from you again and again when asked. And he was put in a position, I felt it extraordinarily unfortunate that the incumbent tried to paint him as a racist when there's the last thing in the world that Chuck Hytaian is a racist. That has never been the case and never will be. And yet a lot of people, because of the magnitude of this discussion, got all confused and they didn't know where they were. And this is why I think it even hammers home even more strongly the importance of taking the time to talk about these kinds of issues, taking the time to talk about, is there a responsibility? Is what you do just a catharsis that is all right for people? I happen to believe that kind of catharsis on airwaves like this that are heard by so many and listened to by so many, accepted by so many when unchallenged, hurts our ability to work together as a society. That's why I think it's important to speak out, but it gets to a much deeper issue that ultimately we're going to have to discuss, although no one is going to close down the airwaves, nor should they. We have to maintain freedom of speech and defend it to our last breath, even if we don't like the speech that we're hearing. But I believe also there is then a commensurate responsibility on the parts of those of us that are trying to lead, to speak out and say, this is where I differ. This is where I think a line has to be drawn. But this is an issue that I believe you're going to see the talk shows discuss for a long time to come in the future, because you do have a great deal of influence. You do have the ability to really to affect how people behave with one another. And that's an awesome responsibility, as is being governor, and that's why we find ourselves here, I think.
Right, you are. Then it's safe to say you don't agree with the congressman from the 9th Congressional District who back in the summer, long before all of this blew up, said that yours truly, Bob Grant, and my colleague, Rush Limbaugh, these are Bob Torricelli's words, we are enemies of democracy. Now, it seems to me that this is illustrative of democracy in action, talking on the radio, free speech, one view opposing another view. And yet he says we were enemies of democracy who wanted to do something about reining us in.
You'd get into very dangerous ground when you start trying to trample on people's constitutional rights to free speech. I would never condone that kind of action. I would never condone that kind of discussion even. Where I do come down to say is when you have that kind of influence and you have that kind of audience, that there is a responsibility that goes along with it, at least from somebody from my perspective, to speak out when I think it is being divisive. And we just can't, I can't at least, condone divisive dialogue, and that's what I am concerned about and have been concerned about. I would never say, even when Khalid Mohammed spoke out at Kane College, I never denied his right to say what he said, but I disagreed with what he said fervently and made a great effort to try to draw attention to how divisive that was. That's why I feel I've got to be consistent.
Governor, excuse me, but I certainly hope you don't feel that anything that I've said has even remotely any equivalency to what he has said.
Not in the kind of language that he has used, the speech, the format he's used, but I have been concerned about the kinds of discussions that have gone on and some of the language that's been used. As I say, categorizing whole peoples because of who they are, whether they be Haitian or black or homosexual or whatever.
I would agree if that had actually been the case. I don't want to belabor the point, but it certainly has never actually happened from here. But if you would read edited versions of what happened, you would come to that conclusion. The governor has agreed to take some telephone calls, and indeed we're going to do that in just a moment, and I commend her for agreeing to do that because she's heard this program. She knows how rough some of you can be. But we're going to get to those telephones on WABC in just a moment. Slipping in right now, the pride of Somerset County, Joe Nolan. All right, Governor, we're all set to take a call from Walter. Now, this call is coming from Buffalo, New York.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
sir. You're on with Governor Whitman.
Oh, good evening to both of you. Yes, Governor Whitman, I'd like to... I really respect what you did, and I thought it took a lot of guts, especially since you're part of the Republican Party, and it couldn't have been too easy for you to do. What I would like to do is, can I give you 2 examples of why I think Bob Grant is really a racist?
No, you can't.
Why not?
Because that's not why we have the governor here. He said he wanted to... You know, when people tell the screener they want to talk about one thing, and then they turn right around and change... I feel that person doesn't deserve to be heard. He told Mr. Koch he wanted to talk about something entirely different, and then he comes up with that thing. Let's try Al from the Bronx. Hello, Al.
Hello. Governor, you said something about the dangers of comments that categorize and condemn whole groups of people.
That's right.
I have never heard Bob talk that way on any broadcast, and if the small group of clergymen who came to see you said that he had, it strikes me that you were unduly credulous if you accepted that without checking with Bob or checking the facts in some way.
Well, it didn't come from that. It came from reading some articles. It came from, and as I said, I didn't say that Bob Grant said all of this, but the talk on the radio, in the quotes, and I don't think it's ever been denied that there have been discussions like that from callers.
Condemned whole category?
Well, when you say that the Haitian boat people would be better off drowning because it would solve our immigration problem, those kinds of things.
That was not the comment. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well,
articles can distort, and I think this one distorted greatly.
Well, there were a number. It was more than one, and that's where the concern comes. As I say, it is the tenor of the whole dialogue. If by having this discussion we can get anybody to stop for a moment to think a little bit about what their words imply, then I think we've made a difference, and that's what's important about tonight particularly.
Well, tonight is important. I would have been much happier if you had consulted Bob long before this whole thing blew up to such proportions, before you made such a pronouncement.
Well, all right. I appreciate your support, Al, but I'm not condemning the governor. As a matter of fact, I'm very pleased that she's come in.
By any means.
And I think that she deserves credit for what she's doing. Thank you, Al.
I do, too.
Okay. I don't want to recount conversations because sometimes when you start explaining, people say, aha, he's explaining. The Haitian boat situation, you've alluded to that twice, so let me try to explain just this much. As you know full well, the format, the dynamics of this show. This was an ongoing conversation concerning what was happening. Day in, day out, we were confronted with this problem. And I said, in response to a caller, I said, well, if we'd stop picking them up, they would stop making those boats and setting out from Port-au-Prince and risking their lives to come out. We'd stop picking them up. And he said, yeah, that's good. He said, well, what if they drown? I said, well, if they drown, then the word would go back to Port-au-Prince, it's not safe, and they would stop. Now, that sounds very harsh, and it is. But it wasn't a gratuitous statement saying, I wish they would all drown. Okay. Joe, you're on WABC with the governor. You're calling from Waldwick.
Yes, sir. But I will stick to my topic. Governor, good evening.
Good evening.
Several times during your beginning of your conversation with Bob, you mentioned that what could be dangerous and when either Bob's comments or the caller's comments go unchallenged.
Right.
Governor, you must know the rest of the format of the station. You've got Lionel in the morning, who is somewhat of a moderate. You've got Lynn Samuels, you've got Ed Koch, and you've got Mayor Giuliani. Certainly the opposition voice is well represented by the other talk show hosts on the station.
Well, we don't want to mention Lynn Samuels because Lynn Samuels bashes Christy Whitman every chance she gets. Because, you know why? Christy Whitman committed a terrible sin. You know what that sin is? She's a Republican.
A female Republican, yeah, I understand that. But I do feel that this whole thing was nothing more than a device to assist Lautenberg in his re-election campaign. And unfortunately, it was maybe one of the successful components of his re-election. But again, Bob's opinions are more than countered by the rest of the lineup on WABC.
Well,
in any event, keep on cutting the taxes, and we'll certainly be voting for you for re-election.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
You know, I did get a call. I don't know if it was Pat Buchanan or who it was. I think it was Pat, or maybe it was Bob Novak. And they said, who is Lautenberg running against? Are you running for the United States Senate, or is Chuck Hatayan running? I said, well, Chuck Hatayan is running against Lautenberg, but Lautenberg is running against me. No matter what you want to say about any comments that I have made in the past, guilt by association was the hallmark of McCarthyism. This is why people look back and say, oh, it was terrible. Here you forget about me. Let's assume I'm the worst possible thing. Here you had Chuck Hatayan being pilloried because of any association with me, and unfortunately, it worked because Chuck didn't know how to handle it.
Well, I think there were other issues that actually, at the end of the day, were perhaps the more determining factors. But obviously, when you're in a campaign like that, nothing helps. And it was an extraordinarily negative campaign, and it was an extraordinarily low blow to try to say that he was a racist, as I said earlier. Because you're talking about someone who authored the legislation that required Holocaust education in the schools, who shepherded through bias crime legislation, got it to the stage where I could sign it into law, a member of an ethnic minority that had been terribly persecuted, who understands about that perhaps more than anyone. And for Frank Lautenberg to have characterized him as a racist was very unfair, and that's why he pulled that ad. But anytime you have that kind of thing in a closely fought and contested election, every little thing makes a difference.
Well, you see how unfair it all is. Of course, who said politics was going to be fair? Life isn't fair. But here, he also campaigned against, in that outrageous, slanderous commercial. He had 3 bills, a bill of particulars that took in 3 outstanding sins committed by Chuck Hatayan. The worst one, of course, is associated with me. Also, his stand on abortion, which I didn't think really should have been an issue, but he used it. And yet the irony is, I'm pro-choice. I get criticized by my conservative brethren for being pro-choice. So he could have said, well, you know, Chuck must be pro-choice really because he's associated with Bob Grant, who is pro-choice. You see how ridiculous it all is?
Well, that's, again, it gets back to that whole issue of understanding words and how they're used and how words can shape behavior and how that then gets translated outside. It's a very, very fine line to walk. It is something that requires a great deal of understanding and sensitivity, and it's an issue that is going to be part and with us forever. It always has been. This is nothing new in the sense of there have been controversial statements and there have been controversial people on the airwaves for a long time and discussions that go on. It's just a question of, from time to time, raising the flag and saying some of it, and some of the things that we encourage people to think or allow people to think and to verbalize without challenging at the time. I can understand what that previous caller said, that their balances over the course of a day.
Yeah.
It's a question of at that time when people who listen to you tend not to listen to those other programs, I would believe.
That's true. If there's a shortcoming, well, of course, I have many shortcomings, but certainly one shortcoming is because I don't take myself all that seriously. Nowhere near as seriously as other people take me. I forget that something I say carries a lot of weight.
A great deal of weight.
Now, you mentioned the word flag. And that reminds me of something going on at Montclair State. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Apparently, a student had put up a flag for a period of 15 minutes in a cafeteria. It was a Confederate flag. And now the fraternity that student belongs to has to do 150 hours of community service. Don't you think that's extreme?
I don't know the circumstances surrounding it. Again, if it was done if it were done as a symbol to say that some people don't belong here or we're not going to be tolerant of some people, then we have a serious problem on our hands. If it was just because he was from the South, I mean, I have no idea. I don't know what was behind it. But again, you know, we can get into political correctness that can tie us up in knots so that nobody can say anything, and that's not right either. We've got to understand that you've got to face problems, you've got to discuss them and deal with them. The right to put up a flag, unless there was something against putting up a flag, he could put it up. But I also think at the same instance, that can be very hurtful to a lot of people. You know, Bob, it's interesting, if I could just digress for a moment. Our daughter goes to a school that used to be all male and is now co-ed, and has only been co-ed for about 4 years. She is just part of a new group. She is heading up a group, and one of the things that she said is, It's a group on women of the girls there at the school, and the concern that they have is a lot of discussion that they overhear the boys saying about girls don't belong here, and offhand remarks that are very hurtful to these kids. I mean, and they're 15, 16, 17. So what she's going to do and the group is going to do is put on some skits for the schools. She said, I don't want to be confrontational, Mom, but I want them to understand how it sounds to us. And I think that's a real message. We don't always walk in the other person's shoes. We don't always understand how much it can affect someone else, what we say. And you particularly, you should take yourself seriously because you do have such a great impact on people and such huge influence. You really do. And I was pleased with her attitude. I think that's the attitude we ought to take. It's all right. They're going to say things, and we can't stop people from saying things. They have a right to say things. But on the other side, we ought to, every once in a while, we've got to stop, and we've got to look again and say, what does this do to somebody else? How does it hurt them?
You want your daughter to go into politics?
No, not. I want her to do what she wants to do, and I know her well enough to know that she'll do what she wants to do.
Okay, we'll continue on WABC in just a moment. Patchogue, that's Harold Fire Scene Country. Hey, Robert, you're on WABC. Hello.
Good evening, Mr. Grant. Good evening, Governor Whitman.
Well, now wait, I should have told you. The governor had to leave, and she left. So you just got me. I'm sorry. I should have announced that. But while the commercial was playing, she told me that she had to leave, and that was because somebody came in, whispered something in her ear, said something like, you have to be at so and so, and she looked at the watch and bingo, left.
Well, perhaps she's still listening, and I could still ask her maybe on another show she could answer my question. I wanted to commend her on her coming out today to put down the dialogue of those who categorize or stereotype a group, but would she so boldly come on the radio and denounce or condemn the dialogue of those such as Al Sharpton and Khalid Muhammad and Jesse Jackson? Or is she going to be too politically correct and not do that, but denounce someone who's speaking out against the minorities?
Well, this is something she can think about if she's listening. Okay, Robert, thank you.
Thank you.
Paula, you're on WABC. Hello.
Hi, Bob. God bless you. I'm glad you're hanging in there. I love you, and I wanted to tell the governor that I wouldn't have known about her if it hadn't been for you. I was at the Giuliani headquarters biting my nails, hoping and praying that she would win, and I only knew about her with the exception of a line or two in a newspaper. I heard about her because of you. And I, too, have been a champion for years and years for civil rights, and I've been a Bob Grant listener for years. And I will tell you something. I know that Bob Grant, you are not a racist. And if you are, then she is, and I am, and a lot of other people. And I also want to say, why don't you get some of these people like Thomas Sowell, some of the black, wonderful people that you have had on your show, that wonderful black lady, Myrtle
Whitmore.
Yes.
Yeah.
And get a whole group of them on one show, and let's get the facts out there.
Well,
you've been crucified, but Christ was too, remember? And we all love him.
Well, too many people try to compare themselves with Jesus, and I don't want to be guilty of that. I think
that's the perfect. I know you're not perfect, but you were close to it.
Oh, Paula, I appreciate the call. It's unfortunate that the slime got on from Buffalo, or claimed he was from Buffalo.
Oh, right.
Said he wanted to talk about one thing, and then he pulled that stunt. Mm-hmm. And I saw the look on the governor's face, which indicated that it upset her. Anyway, thank you for the call, Paul.
God bless you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
dear, bye. Margaret, you're on WABC. Hello.
Hi there, Mr. Grant. Thanks for taking my call. I've been listening to Governor Christie Whitman pontificate, and it's really made me sick for the last hour. I have no hate or dislike for any other race. I wasn't raised that way. I'm a listener of WABC Radio, and I think for myself, as most of your listeners, I think, do. But when was she recently raised to sainthood?
What's that?
When was she recently raised to sainthood that she could be so, say that she can't condone divisive dialogue? I mean, where was she when Khalid Muhammad spewed hatred? Why wasn't she on the Capitol steps then? And that's what I don't understand. Why did she just be so mean to you? It's not fair, and she has to. She didn't assert herself against Khalid Muhammad.
Well, I think she said she did. I'll take her word for it that she did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're in political life as she is, sometimes you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. That's why I liked Ronald Reagan so much, because Ronald Reagan was true to his beliefs, and people loved him because they knew he was a good, decent man. And the only reason I'm even talking about him is he is one of the rare politicians who didn't worry about, well, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't.
Right.
Now, I think Christy Whitman has a great deal of ability. I think she has a lot to offer. I have great admiration for her. You know, I don't want to judge her harshly.
Oh, sure.
Chuck Hatayan, however, having gone through the campaign with him and seeing that he didn't have the courage to stick with it, and he allowed Frank Lautenberg to run his campaign, even though I personally like Chuck and always will. He's a fine man. Nevertheless, I have to quote a columnist from the Asbury Park Press today who says, the day after the election, Garabed Chuck threw away his index card, called Grant to thank the host for his support, when it didn't matter anymore. Garabed Chuck decided to take a stand. On October 16th, I noted the hypocrisy of the double standard in New Jersey politics. Whitman has responded one way. Steve Korodemus belatedly responded another way. But when it comes to Garabed Chuck, I was wrong. He is not simply a hypocrite. He is, in the words of the Bob Grant partisans, a spineless hypocrite. Now, that's from a column by a gentleman who writes for the Asbury Park Press. And the only reason I even quote that is Chuck suffered because he tried to have it both ways, and you can't have it both ways. He either should have completely denounced me, called me any name he wanted to, or said to Frank Lautenberg, you bet I'm going on his show. The day he was on taping with Gabe Pressman, on that particular day, Gabe says, well, I understand you're going to appear on the Bob Grant show, and he says, no, I'm not. And Lautenberg said, oh, yes, you are. You're going there after this taping. And he says, oh, that shows you how much you know. No, I'm not. Well, actually, he was to have been on this show and chickened out. So all I'm saying is, in life, if you operate out of fear, you lose.
Oh, definitely. But don't you think that it was just... She opened up a whole can of worms by doing what she did.
Well, I see what you're saying, but again, I think that she was more victim than cause of the problem. I know what you mean. Thank you for the call, Margaret. Ladies and gentlemen, that slams the lid on things for today. I hope you've enjoyed the program as much as I think I have. Enjoyed our colleagues coming in earlier, and, of course, the visit of the governor. And... a lot of listening coming up. Mark Simone is here to fill in for Lynn Samuels. Then, of course, Jay Diamond, followed by Curtis Sliwa, and then Lionel at 6 tomorrow morning. Until tomorrow, this is Bob Grant reminding you, your influence counts. Use it.
Arbitron's #1 AM radio station in New York, Long Island, and the USA.
WABC, New York.
It's 7 o'clock. In a program dedicated to the free and open exchange of ideas and of opinions. And what is on your mind this afternoon, huh? Ladies and gentlemen, the television stations dutifully covered the meeting at the summit between Governor Christy Whitman and yours truly. And in virtually every newspaper in the tri-state area, there were photos and stories about the appearance. But it's interesting that different newspapers presented Governor Whitman's appearance here in different ways. For example, here's one. This is New York Times by a person by the name of Ivor Peterson. Whitman rebukes Bob Grant on the air. Avoid troubling racial comments, New Jersey governor asks. And there's a photo of the governor and I shaking hands, and Says the radio talk show host Bob Grant shook hands yesterday with Christine Todd Whitman, the New Jersey governor, who chided him about racial comments made by him or attributed to him on his program. And then they have an excerpt of a conversation we had, but I won't read that to you. We go over to David Wall's column. He's an excellent, superior writer, a real pro from the Star-Ledger. Also, another photo. Whitman returns the grand show to abhor racism and talk up host. Grant said Hatayan failed to topple Loudenberg because the Republican nominee bowed to pressure and canceled a planned appearance on the program a week before the election. Then there's the Asbury Park Press, which had assigned an excellent writer by the name of Melanie Eversley. And let's see what Miss Melanie E. Eversley wrote. She's the Asbury Park Press multicultural affairs writer. Anyway, the caption under the picture says, "Please bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, please bear with me. I don't ordinarily come in here with a sheaf of papers like this." Oh, Whitman to Grant, weigh your words. Whitman to Grant, weigh your words. They had a front page photo, color photo, talking it over. Surrounded by reporters and cameraman, Governor Whitman and talk show host Bob Grant discuss racism. Now, I think the governor did the right thing. I think that being basically a decent person, that she had a chance to ruminate over what she had done, and she decided that the right thing was to come in and talk to me. And many of you are saying it was the thousands and thousands of